Welcome to This Explainer. The architecture of belief isn't built on accidents. It's constructed, piece by forces operating so quietly you rarely even notice them. We usually think of power as something physical, right? Like territory, resources, or money. But the absolute ultimate form of power isn't about controlling what you do. It's about controlling how you actually perceive reality itself. Think of propaganda as the invisible infrastructure of the mind. It shapes public opinion, it manipulates our baseline emotions, and it totally engineers consensus by altering the very foundation of how you and I see the world around us.
So I have to ask, do you think independently? If I asked you that face to face, you'd probably immediately answer with a resounding, well, yeah, of course I do. I mean, we all deeply value our autonomy. We want to believe our thoughts are the product of our own rational, uninfluenced deduction. But the reality, it's a whole lot more complex. Subconscious influence operates quietly in the background, entirely bypassing your brain's prefrontal cortex, which is your center for logic and reason. Instead, it targets the amygdala, triggering emotional responses before your logic even has a chance to boot up. Governments, corporations, media organizations, they all understand this neurological loophole. They use it to guide public opinion and cement loyalty, all while preserving the clever illusion that you came to those conclusions entirely on your own.
The most effective propaganda is the kind people do not notice. When we hear that word propaganda, our minds usually jump right to faded authoritarian war posters or state-run television broadcasts. But true modern propaganda, it's an invisible force. It is seamlessly woven into the fabric of our daily lives. It's that native advertising disguised as a totally objective news article. It's the subtle product placement in a blockbuster movie that makes a certain lifestyle seem universally desirable. It is just so deeply integrated into our environment that it's incredibly difficult to spot, precisely because it feels like a totally natural part of the cultural landscape.
Section 1. The invisible weapon, the evolution of control.
To truly grasp how this infrastructure works today, we really have to trace its evolution. The term itself actually goes way back to the 17th century, when the Catholic Church established the Congregation for Propagating the Faith. Back then, its original intent was simply to spread information. But by World War II, the concept had been fully weaponized. Nations mobilized entire populations using highly engineered messaging. They deployed symbols, massive rallies, and theatrical speeches to create a unified national identity while systematically demonizing their adversaries. But here's the thing. The methodology didn't peak in the 20th century. Today, propaganda has evolved into a hyper-targeted digital ecosystem. It's migrated from town squares and broadcast radio directly into the social media algorithms right in the palms of our hands, utilizing literally thousands of data points to deliver customized psychological triggers to every single user. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 2. Mechanics of Manipulation. How our logic gets bypassed. The first and perhaps most pervasive tool is known in psychology as the illusory truth effect. Human brains are incredibly efficient machines, which honestly means they're kind of lazy. We naturally equate cognitive ease with truth. In other words, if an idea is easy to process because it's familiar, the brain just assumes it must be accurate. So when a false narrative is repeated enough times, our cognitive defenses just simply surrender to the familiarity. Propagandists completely exploit this neurological shortcut. They bombard the public with identical slogans, phrases, and talking points across multiple platforms until a fabricated reality literally just becomes part of the accepted everyday consensus. Next up is the deployment of the emotional arsenal, where the absolute weapon of choice, without a doubt, is fear. Neurologically speaking, fear forcefully overrides critical thinking. When a population feels threatened, the collective desire for safety dramatically increases compliance, and people become way more willing to accept extreme authority. Propaganda achieves this by manufacturing imaginary dangers, or honestly, even more effectively, by taking a real, manageable problem, like economic fluctuations or public health, and artificially exaggerating it into a full-blown apocalyptic threat. By keeping society in a state of constant, heightened stress, rational, nuanced discourse just collapses. Emotion takes the steering wheel, and suddenly, obedience is framed as the only logical path to survival. Another foundational tactic leverages deep-seated in-group and out-group psychology. This involves dividing society strictly into two monolithic camps, us versus them. The in-group is continuously praised as the embodiment of everything good, honest, and patriotic. Meanwhile, the outgroup is framed not just as wrong, but as fundamentally dangerous and solely responsible for all of society's grievances. This tactic is intentionally designed to bypass factual debate entirely by relying heavily on dehumanization. By convincing ordinary people that a specific subset of their own neighbors are active threats to their way of life, it systematically breaks down empathy. And history gives us a devastatingly clear clinical record of how this specific architectural blueprint is used to justify severe discrimination and even violence, all while the participants genuinely believe they are acting righteously. Let's move forward and see how this builds. Section 3. The digital battlefield. Modern manipulation. Let's be blunt here. Facts rarely control minds. Emotions do. In the modern era, this reality is the absolute foundational business model of the attention economy. Social media algorithms are not designed to inform you. They are explicitly engineered to maximize the amount of time you spend on the platform. And the one metric that drives the highest engagement? Outrage. Content that provokes shock, anger, or moral indignation is systematically amplified by the very architecture of the web. This means that highly emotional, often wildly misleading headlines will travel at lightning speed, going viral and reaching millions of feeds before the facts can even be verified. We aren't just passive consumers anymore. The platforms weaponize our own emotional reactions, so we do the distributing for them. And this brilliantly illustrates how propaganda has mutated. It relies on complex layers of modern camouflage, going far beyond simple state-sponsored messaging. Commercial advertisers now spend billions not just to sell a product, but to sell identity and status, subtly manipulating how we define our own self-worth. Then there's the heavy reliance on influencers and celebrities. This tactic leverages parasocial trust. We develop these one-sided psychological bonds with digital personalities, making us highly susceptible when they endorse a narrative or a product, mostly because it feels like advice from a close friend rather than a paid deployment. Furthermore, the most dangerous modern campaigns don't even rely on outright lies. They utilize partial truths stripped of their necessary context, creating a deeply convincing, fractured reality. Add to this the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence and deepfake technology. We are literally entering an era where we can no longer trust our own eyes and ears. When video and audio can be perfectly fabricated to show public figures saying or doing things that never happened, our fundamental baseline for objective reality is completely undermined.
Section 4. Why our brains surrender. Internal vulnerability. Pivoting from those external forces to our own internal vulnerabilities, we really have to examine social conformity. Because this isn't just a simple desire to be liked, it is deeply, deeply rooted in our evolutionary psychology. For early humans, being ostracized from the tribe literally meant death. Our brains are hardwired to prioritize group cohesion over individual accuracy. Propagandists totally exploit this survival mechanism through tactics like astroturfing, which is artificially creating the illusion of widespread grassroots support for an idea. When it appears that an overwhelming majority of your community holds a certain belief, the psychological pressure to align is immense. We readily surrender our dissenting thoughts just to avoid the friction and peril of standing alone.
And this vulnerability is massively compounded by confirmation bias. That's the psychological tendency to aggressively seek out information that validates our pre-existing beliefs while instantly rejecting anything that induces cognitive dissonance. Now, in the past, you might occasionally bump into a conflicting viewpoint. But today, digital algorithms weaponize this bias by constructing airtight echo chambers right around us. They track what we click, what we like, and what we watch, and then they subsequently filter out any dissenting data before we even have the chance to ignore it ourselves. Once a person becomes emotionally invested in a curated narrative, breaking through that algorithmic and psychological barrier becomes extraordinarily difficult. I mean, the facts literally don't matter if they are never allowed into the feed in the first place. So, the crucial point is, how do we fight back? Section 5. Building your mental shield. Psychological control thrives in the absence of friction. To combat it, we must actively build a mental shield rooted in media literacy and relentless critical thinking. First off, this means interrogating the information we consume by recognizing the inherent bias not just of the publisher, but of ourselves. We have to stop and ask, who benefits from me believing this? Second, diversifying your information intake is absolutely critical, but it has to be intentional. Simply looking at different platforms isn't enough if they're all feeding the same demographic. We have to actively seek out high-quality primary sources and deliberately read well-reasoned arguments from opposing viewpoints to break our own echo chambers. And third, perhaps most crucially, we must monitor our own neurological responses. When an article, a video, or a post makes you feel a sudden surge of intense anger, fear, or profound vindication, that is the exact moment you are most vulnerable. That is the moment to pause, step back, and force your logical brain to take over the processing. Which brings us right back to that lingering question. Are your thoughts truly your own? The battle for cognitive sovereignty is absolutely the defining conflict of the digital age. It isn't being fought on traditional battlefields. It's happening right now, behind our screens, within our algorithms, and inside our own minds. Understanding the architecture of these invisible weapons is literally the only way to dismantle them. Absolute vigilance is no longer optional. So protect your attention, audit your beliefs, and guard your ability to think for yourself. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.